It is 2:17 in the afternoon and you are watching the same video for the third time. Not because it is particularly good, it is fine, it is adequate. It is the kind of content that exists in the space between interesting and boring without committing to either. But because watching it a third time requires nothing from you, no orientation, no adjustment, no engagement with the unexpected. You know the shape of it, you know where the funny part is and where the slow part is and roughly how long until it ends. And this foreknowledge is a form of comfort that you are aware is embarrassing and that you practice anyway because awareness and behavior you have learned are not as connected as people seem to believe they are. Your room is not squalid. You want to be clear about this, at least to yourself, because squalid is the word that appears in the background of your self-conception like a word you're trying not to read. It is cluttered, yes, and the curtains have been closed long enough that you have lost track of whether the light outside is morning or afternoon except by the clock, and there are 3 cups on the desk that should have been taken to the kitchen days ago, and the laundry situation is being managed on a timeline that could be generously described as flexible, but it is not squalid. You make these distinctions because they are the distinctions available to you. You graduated a year and 4 months ago. You have applied to 37 positions since then, been interviewed for 6, and received the particular species of rejection email that thanks you for your interest and wishes you well in your future endeavors, which is a sentence that has the grammar of kindness and the content of nothing. The last application you sent was 6 weeks ago for a marketing coordinator position at a company whose product you barely understood and whose Glassdoor reviews suggested a management culture that was described by multiple reviewers independently as chaotic. You have not heard back. You have told yourself that this is because the market is difficult, which is true, and you have told yourself that you'll apply again soon, which has been true in the way that things are true when they remain consistently in the future. The thing that changes is not dramatic. It is a Sunday evening and your mother knocks on your door, which she does with a specific kind of knock, 2 quick taps and then a pause, as if giving the knock itself time to become unwelcome. And she comes in without waiting for an answer, which is also a specific kind of thing. And she sits on the edge of your bed in the way people sit when they have been thinking about what to say for longer than the conversation will take. She doesn't cry. Your mother is not a crying person. She says your name. She says she's been thinking. She says she needs to say something she's been putting off saying because she didn't know how to say it without it sounding like something she doesn't mean, which is that she loves you, but that she cannot keep doing this indefinitely, and that she needs to see something, some movement, some evidence of a direction by the end of the month. She says 30 days. She says she's not trying to be cruel. She says she's trying to do the right thing by you and also by herself, and she's not sure anymore what that looks like. She sits there for a moment after saying it, and you can see that it cost her, that she held it for a long time before putting it down here in your room among the 3 cups and the flexible laundry timeline, and you say, okay, and she nods, and she leaves. And you sit there in the particular silence of a room that was a refuge until someone came into it with a calendar. 30 days is the pressure. It is not dramatic, it is not an eviction notice, it is not a debt collector. It is just your mother with reasonable patience, fully extended, and the specific unbearability of disappointing someone who has not stopped loving you through the disappointing, which is almost worse than the kind of disappointment that generates anger, because anger gives you something to push against, and this gives you nothing but the soft weight of someone's continued hope. You open your laptop, you go to the job board. The cursor sits in the search field for a moment, and you type the word that means anything, which in this context is the empty query that returns everything. And you look at the list with the same attention you've brought to it before, which is the attention of someone looking for reasons rather than options. And somewhere in the first page of results, between a sales associate position and an administrative assistant posting, you see a listing for a data entry role, remote, part-time, $12 an hour, no experience required, 15 to 20 hours a week, immediate openings. It is the least interesting thing on the page. It is the listing you would have scrolled past on a different day when scrolling past was still an option available to you. You click on it and you apply, and you go back to your video and you watch it for the 4th time and you fall asleep before it ends. They email you in 3 days. The interview, if it can be called that, is a 20-minute video call with a woman from HR who asks you standard questions in a tone that suggests she is reading from a document she cannot see you reading from either, and you answer them in the language that interviews require: motivated, detail-oriented, comfortable with independent work. And she says, great, and says, you'll hear within the week. You hear in 2 days. You are hired. The onboarding is a PDF and a video tutorial and an email with your login credentials. Your first set of tasks are waiting in a shared drive by Monday morning. You are technically employed. Part-time, $12 an hour, 15 hours a week, which comes to $720 a month before taxes, which is not money and is also something which is the only kind of something currently on offer. You tell your mother at dinner. She looks at you with an expression that is careful in the way of someone who has learned not to respond too large to incremental things. And she says, that's good. You say it's just part-time. She says it's a start. You both eat for a moment and you are aware of something shifting. Not dramatically, not irreversibly, but a slight reorientation of the room's social physics. And you are not sure if you find it relieving or threatening. And the answer you discover over the following days is both simultaneously. The work is exactly what it advertises itself as being, which is so rare as to be faintly shocking. You enter data. You have a spreadsheet and a set of source documents and a set of fields to populate and a daily quota of records that the company tracks through the shared drive's timestamp history, which you discover on the third day when your manager, a person you have never seen and only know as a name at the bottom of correction emails, sends a message noting that Monday's output was below the expected threshold and asking you to please aim for the daily target going forward. The message is politely worded. It is also the first time in 14 months that someone's professional expectations of you have been specific enough to either meet or fail. You sit with this for a moment. You open the spreadsheet. You enter data for 3 hours without stopping, hitting 112% of the daily target, which is information nobody asked for, but which you calculate anyway. The thing about data entry, which is also the thing about your life for the past 14 months, and which the data entry illuminates by contrast, is that it requires a form of sustained attention that your brain has partially forgotten. Not intelligence. Intelligence is the wrong word for what the job requires, which is something more like continuity, the ability to keep doing the same thing in the same correct way without allowing the portion of your mind that processes boredom to take over the portion that processes accuracy. You were good at this in school. In the specific way that school rewards you could read things carefully, you could hold detail, you could perform the executive function of sustained directed effort. The 14 months have eroded this. Not destroyed it, eroded it. You notice the erosion not in a moment of failure, but in the friction of effort, the way the first hour of data entry requires active management of your own attention in a way it would not have required before. You begin building habits around the work because the work is the only external structure in your day, and structure, even 12-hour-a-week structure, creates the gravity necessary for other things to organize around. You are up by 9 most days, which is not early and is not late, and which represents a 2-hour shift from the 11:30 that was your de facto wake time for most of the past year. You do the work in the morning now, 2 to 3 hours before lunch, and the afternoon becomes a different kind of afternoon than it was, not empty in the specific way of something that should be filled but isn't, but empty in the way of time that has been earned, which turns out to be a different texture entirely. You are aware that this distinction is internal and invisible, and that from the outside, your afternoon looks the same as it did when it was unearned, but from the inside, it is not the same at all, and the inside is where you live. The social architecture of being NEET, which you understand in retrospect more clearly than you understood it while fully inside it, is a system of mutual avoidance that reinforces itself in all directions. You avoid people because your situation is embarrassing to explain, and because you have been out of the rhythms of interaction long enough that interaction requires more activation energy than you often have, and because the question, so what are you up to lately, is a question that has no answer that is both honest and comfortable to say out loud. And people, your people, the people from university and before, avoid the topic because they don't want to make you feel bad, and because they are busy with their own lives, and because the friendship that is easy to maintain across similar situations becomes complicated to maintain across divergent ones. You do not lose these people dramatically. You lose them gradually, in the increasing distance between responses, in the plans that are made and gently deferred, in the sense that you are moving on different timelines and that yours has slowed or stopped while theirs continues. You do not blame them. You almost blame them because blaming them would be simpler. There is a LinkedIn notification in the 8th month of your unemployment, the 6th month before the data entry job, 2 months into it, that a person you were close to in university has been promoted to senior associate at a firm whose name is impressive enough that it is the name of a firm rather than a description of what it does. You look at their profile for longer than you mean to, and you feel something complicated that you catalog eventually as not quite envy. Envy implies wanting the specific thing the other person has, and you are not sure you want their specific thing, but something adjacent to it. Something that is about the distance between where you are and where you expect it to be. A distance that is both your fault and not your fault in proportions you cannot determine clearly and have stopped trying to. You close LinkedIn. You go back to the spreadsheet. You enter 37 records before you stop. This is not a triumph, and you don't experience it as one. You experience it as the day continuing, which is what days do. The part-time work leads in the 3rd month to an offer of additional hours. Your manager, you still have not seen her face and know her only by name and the occasional correction email and a new category, the occasional approval email, which turns out to be its own significant thing, sends you a message asking if you'd be available for 25 hours instead of 15. She says the team is expanding and your accuracy rate is one of the highest among the remote contractors. You read the sentence 3 times. Not because you don't believe it, but because it has been long enough since a professional context produced anything resembling this specific sentence directed at you that you need a moment to receive it correctly. You respond that yes, you'd be available for 25 hours. You do not say anything else. You close the email and sit there in the chair at your desk, and the room is the same room, and the curtains are the same curtains, and the cups now consistently returned to the kitchen are not on the desk, and you are aware that something is different without being able to name it more precisely than that. 25 hours at $12 is $1,200 a month before taxes. Call it $970 after. This does not change your fundamental situation. You are still in your mother's house, still in the room, still without the social infrastructure of a life that has been mostly paused since graduation. But the weight of the month has shifted by some amount that is felt rather than calculated. You put $80 into a savings account. This is not a meaningful sum. It is the first meaningful action you have taken with money in 14 months, and the meaningfulness is not in the amount, but in the direction of it. Your mother says something one evening that is not about the job, but is about you, or about something she's noticed, which is that you seem a bit more like yourself lately, and you are not entirely sure what she means by this or whether she's right, but you take it in and hold it somewhere without scrutinizing it too hard because some things are more useful held lightly. The renegotiation of your internal life that the work requires is slow and not linear. There are weeks when the activation problem is bad again, when the distance between intending to open the spreadsheet and actually opening it is 40 minutes of something that is not sleep and not rest, but a kind of paralysis that you've learned to recognize and not fully overcome. On these days, you get the work done eventually, sometimes in a compressed rush in the afternoon that puts your output slightly below threshold, and you receive a gentle noting from your manager, and you accept the noting without self-flagellation, which is something you've been practicing because self-flagellation is an available substitute for action that you've been using too readily for too long. You note the note, you open the spreadsheet the next morning, you continue. There is a day in the 5th month of the data entry work when you are doing your records and you notice that you have been doing them for 2 hours without once checking how much time has passed, which used to be something you did every 7 minutes. The clock checking of someone who is enduring time rather than spending it. You only notice the 2 hours have passed when you reach a natural stopping point in the source documents and look up, and the room has different light in it than it did when you started, afternoon light. And you realize you were somewhere else for 2 hours in the only way that matters, which is that you weren't thinking about being there. This is a small thing. You make yourself a cup of tea and go back to it. The gap between who you are and who the world believes people your age should be at this point has been, for 14 months and then some, a source of a particular private anguish that you've mostly managed alone. Not dramatically, not in the way of crises, not in the way that requires intervention, but in the low-grade, constant way of a sound you can't locate and can't stop hearing. The anguish is made partly of the obvious things: the financial dependency, the suspended timeline, the sense of having missed something that you were supposed to catch. But it is also made of subtler things, things harder to discuss even with yourself. It is made of the fear that the version of you that was going to do something has been sitting still for so long that the doing something is no longer available to that version, that you've changed in ways that aren't obvious from outside, but that you can feel from inside. In your diminished tolerance for difficulty, your reduced confidence in your own judgment, your tendency to interpret ambiguity as evidence of failure. These are things the 14 months have done to you. You do not have a plan to undo them. You are trying to simply stop adding to them. There is a conversation you have with someone from university, a person you haven't spoken to in 8 months, who messages you out of something that might be genuine curiosity or might be guilty checking in, and you receive the message with the specific alertness of someone for whom unexpected social contact requires preparation. They ask how you're doing. You say things have been slow, but you've been doing some remote work. They say that's cool. What kind of work? You say data entry. It's not exciting, but it's something. And they say something that lands unexpectedly, not because it's wise, but because of its ordinariness. They say, yeah, I did admin work for like a year after graduation. It's a good foot in the door. They move on quickly to other things, and you respond normally, and the conversation is fine and not particularly meaningful. But afterward, you sit with the thing they said a year of admin work after graduation, just said plainly, without the scaffolding of shame, and you think about how long you've been carrying your own situation as if it were unique in its failure, as if the gap between graduation and functioning adulthood were a thing that only happened to people who were specifically broken in specific ways, and you consider the possibility that you've been assigning weight to it, that it doesn't universally deserve, that the gap is sometimes just a gap, that it is survivable, that some people survive it without it defining the shape of everything that comes after. You do not undergo a transformation. Transformation is the word for what happens in stories when the narrative needs to resolve, and your life is not resolving, it is continuing, which is its own kind of movement. What changes over the months is something more like the accumulation of days that are marginally more functional than the days before them, until the accumulation becomes visible as direction, as a vector that has no obvious destination, but that is at least not stationary. You get the work done. You save money in increments that are modest and real. You text people back within a day, usually, which is a resumption of a social practice you abandoned, so gradually you didn't notice the abandonment. You open the curtains in the morning now. This is not a metaphor, or it is both a literal fact and a metaphor, and you allow it to be both without overinterpreting either. Your mother does not mention the 30 days again. She doesn't need to, because the 30 days did the thing it was meant to do, which is not produce a transformation, but produce a movement, a single step that became a second step that became a third. You think about this sometimes, about how much you resisted the conversation she had, how long you sat in the room after she left, cataloging the specific injustice of being given a deadline for something you had no clear method of meeting. And you think about how a deadline, any deadline, is just a way of making the present uncomfortable enough that the future becomes preferable to it, and that the future was always there, always accessible, just not yet more compelling than the room and the video and the flexibility of a timeline with no edges. In the 7th month, you see a full-time listing from a company adjacent to the one you work for, a role that would use the skills the data entry work has been rebuilding in you: attention to detail, comfort with data systems, ability to work independently across digital tools. The salary is $32,000, which is not a salary for someone who has expectations, which you have been careful to manage. You open the application. You fill in your work history. Under current employment, you write remote data coordinator, company name, and the title is slightly more than your actual title, which is remote data entry contractor. But you have been coordinating in the sense of managing your own workflow and output independently, and you decide this is a defensible description, and you submit it and you close the laptop. You do not tell your mother you applied. Not yet. You've learned something about hope in the past 7 months that you didn't know before, which is that it is a limited resource that depletes on use, and that the most efficient use of it is to apply it quietly where it can do its work without the additional maintenance cost of other people knowing about it and asking about it and accidentally adding the weight of their caring to the thing you're trying to hold at a manageable weight. You apply quietly. You wait without ceremony. The room is the same room. The desk is cleaner than it was. The curtains are open and the light is afternoon light, and you have 2 more hours of work to get through before you hit your target, and you open the spreadsheet and you find your place and you begin. This is not a success story. It is not a failure story either. It is the story of a particular stretch of time in a particular life, and what the stretch cost and what it taught and what it left behind, which is a question you can't answer from inside it, which is where you still are, which is fine, which is where everything happens inside in the time that is still ongoing, in the days that have not yet become the past that you will eventually look back at and try to make sense of. You make sense of it as you go, which is the only time you can make sense of anything. You open the spreadsheet, you enter the next record, you continue,